being very clear with your attorney in crafting what it is you want them to do in terms of scope of services is super important. Red flag for me would be a founder or a group of founders who's just extremely overconfident.
What should I look for in the first lawyer that I'm hiring for my business?
Yeah, I think the first thing you want to look for is somebody that you communicate with effectively, especially when the lawyer is getting paid by the hour. You want somebody who can communicate with you in a way that you understand the risks and is not drowning you in legalese. You want somebody who's going to be responsive. And that's one of the biggest complaints to all the bar associations in the US is that a call was made or an email was sent to an attorney and they didn't respond. So having somebody who can communicate effectively with you and timely is probably what you're looking for. And realize that this person is not going to be able to answer all of your legal questions. If they do, or if they attempt to, you should be very afraid because no one lawyer is going to be able to provide all these answers for a startup.
So you should kind of have a lawyer with a big black book that can at least like recommend other lawyers if there is a need.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, so the firm I'm with has, hundreds of attorneys, and we're in the AmLaw 200 biggest firms in the US. But we also are in other jurisdictions through SCG Legal is one of the groups that we work with, and they have attorneys in different countries and different states that we're not in. And we also will refer work back and forth. So having a network of attorneys and law firms that you can connect with quickly is very, very important for an international type startup for sure.
This is very interesting, and it kind of goes back to my own experience with lawyers here, at least in Europe. I found, to the credit of U.S. lawyers, like generally quite responsive to foreigners. But I had a lot of issues with like timely responses, and I think that is such a major issue. And this was for some sole tradership issues, and not for an LLC. But I can imagine that if you run an high velocity LLC or whatever entity you run, you want to have your lawyer almost on speed dial, right? And it kind of rolls into that second point. It's like, okay, so I let's say I have David on speed dial. In what kind of situations is it critical to have your advice as a lawyer?
Yeah, I think the situations where you want to have a lawyer are those situations where litigation is not out of the question and the dollar value associated with that litigation is high. So, for example, if you're signing an agreement with your cell phone provider, you probably don't need a lawyer to look at that. But if you're taking investment from venture capital, you definitely want a lawyer to look at that. If you're hiring somebody, you want a lawyer to look at that. And I would just add to that to be very clear what the scope of the legal services you're requiring is. I mean, that's something that we put in every engagement letter is our scope is limited to X. And we do not like just being general counsel for a company on all issues because that's impractical and it's way too broad. So we want to be very specific, and I'll do free initial consults with clients all the time just to say, all right, let's talk about your issues and let's figure out exactly what the scope of services will be. And then I'll disclose to you who's going to be working on it, their hourly rate, and we'll talk about what the desired outcome looks like. But being very clear with your attorney in crafting what it is you want them to do in terms of scope of services is super important.
Yeah, no, that I think that, and definitely if you pay a lot of money for it, you don't wanna call your lawyer indeed for like, hey, my provider is like, I don't know, changing my contract. What should I do? Yeah, well, that just cost you $500. No, that's fair. And to that point, and this is something that I've found in either companies that I've worked with or looked at myself, because it's there's fast ways of doing things here in the world. Like we now have GPTs out there, we have templates on the internet, and the question that I always have, and I think everybody probably shares, but never can ask, is like, how much can I trust these legal documents that I find online or are GPT generated? Like, are is that 90%? Is it 80%? Should I actually not look online for these things, and should I just talk to a lawyer? It probably depends case by case, but how do you look at that? What's your advice here?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can't trust what you're seeing online. I think there's a lot of nuance in the law that just doesn't show up in online documents. And I can tell you from experience as the chair of our Fennemore Labs committee looking at AI applications, even the really good ones have hallucinations and have errors and will give you conflicting information depending on how you prompt them. So, and this is with very specific, legal tech AI applications, let alone ChatGPT, which is pulling from the entire internet. You can get some good information. I'm not saying that they don't have value. It's just that when you're dealing with other people's money and you have litigation risks that are tremendous and potentially pose existential risks to your company, you definitely want to have a lawyer who understands those issues and is familiar with the jurisdictions you're working in and can give you some good legal advice based on experience as well as what is current in terms of the correct form to be using, but also helping you look around corners that you otherwise wouldn't be looking around. It's super important.
It's interesting that you're saying that. I heard that advice a while ago where somebody said, a lawyer said to me, "It's like, well, if you need to, if you're in need of a legal document, you should probably talk to a lawyer." I'm like, okay, that's something. And the interesting part was that I asked the same question to the specific lawyer. He's like, hey, I found a couple of templates, and I'm not even sure what it was, but it was something relatively simple. He's like, well, even looking at the templates, and this was, I think, for European jurisdiction, but also, countries here in EU are also different. It's like, well, you want to look at not these templates. Let me help you find, the right legal document and do this to get it right. Um, Very important, and I think very easy mistake to make because of so much accessible information, I guess. So let's then hit the next point, which is, I kind of mentioned it already, right? Like, it's easy with so much information lying around, like playing your own legal advice. But what are the most common legal mistakes made by startup founders?
Yeah, I think not engaging an attorney early on and ending up in litigation is obviously the one that I see the most. But that can be from forms they were using and just sort of pretending to be lawyer at the same time they're a startup founder, or it can just be not appreciating what we talked about earlier, which is the need for a real agreement amongst the parties about what the value of the company is worth and how their interests are going to be vested over time, how they're going to get paid out if they decide to leave, or if they basically just stop working, right? I mean, that's all of these things end up in litigation, or at least the threat of litigation, and that will destroy a company's value. So, trying to minimize your litigation threats should be at the top of your agenda, because part of making a successful company is just surviving, and it's very difficult to survive when you're involved in litigation. It's so expensive. It's such a distraction. It takes an emotional toll too. I see it on clients. Like, it's very challenging sitting through depositions and having requests for productions of documents and things. It's just a grind. And so if you can avoid all of that, you're better off.
How often do you see those cases? I mean, like, obviously you're a lawyer, so you see them pretty often. But how often do you see those cases where you see, like, oh shit, they've been too late, or they've not looked for legal counsel early enough?
Yeah, often. I mean, almost all the time, because the nature of the startup is that we're running on a shoestring budget. We need to get things going. We need to
Yep.
move fast. We're going to break things. And so there's a supreme amount of confidence that goes with the startup founder, and that's good for some things. But generally speaking, you're going to end up in a situation where the company is in a compromised position with regard to a third party who has a lawyer that knows you're compromised, and they're going to take advantage of it because they have a client whose interests have been affected. And so, trying to survive through the early stages is going to be important. It's really about mitigating your risk. So when you think about your legal spend, think about it that way, that this is going to keep us alive, so that we can see if our business actually will make money and will survive the early stages.
It's interesting you're saying that. It's one of those points that we actually have. I think it's point 10. Um, your budget spend, and I would like to address that in a little bit. But that you did already mention. It's like some red flags, right? Like, what kind of red flags you see in startup founders? Like, you already mentioned, like, survival, shoestring budget. Um, and how do you, like, steer them away from that? Like, that must be not an easy task to do, and but also as an advice to a founder, from you as a lawyer, like how can you see as a founder that you're actually having those red flags, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for your attorney. This goes back, I think, to the first question too, which is effective communication between the attorney and the startup founders means that they're going to tell you when they think you might be making a mistake or you're, needing some assistance here from a lawyer. Too often, I think founders will basically override legal advice they've been given for the pursuit of a business interest, which sometimes that's the correct decision, right? Business judgment is always going to be an important part of being a founder, but recognizing when it's important to take legal advice and to seek legal advice as a founder is paramount to just keeping alive. So a red flag for me would be a founder or a group of founders who's just extremely overconfident in terms of not appreciating the legal risks that they might be taking with other people's money.
Do you see a big difference between first-time founders and serial entrepreneurs, for that matter?
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, it's just like with lawyers, right? Lawyers who are relatively new don't have a lot of experience to draw on, whereas founders who are more experienced, like a more experienced lawyer, they'll have their life experience to learn from, hopefully, and to course correct when they start to see things that fit a pattern. A lot of, most professions, I think, is just pattern recognition. You start to see the same things over and over again, and you start to deploy that hard-earned wisdom over time. So it's important to respect that, when you're hiring a professional to help you and they have that pattern recognition, they're trying to tell you something. It's good to take that kind of advice.
See, I thought that was interesting because when we were setting this call up, I read that differently, Thomas. I read that as, what are the red flags you see in startup founders that make you not want to work with them, David?
Well, I think in between the lines there, you can probably see what I would be avoiding is a super overconfident founder who doesn't listen to what I'm saying. I think those are the kinds of clients you don't want to have because it's just it has to be a good two-way communication, right? You can't have it be just my way or the highway. It has to be a partnership, in effect, between the lawyer and the founder to try to accomplish the specific work scope that's being worked on.
It's interesting because I think that we all share that. Like when I have overconfident founders, that generally is not a good sign because when we definitely build blockchain tech, sometimes people are actually really good blockchain founders, but they won't know the rest of the business, right? We always say know what you don't know and hire for that, right? At least or outsource for that. The reason why Charlie and I started working together and collaborating and starting this podcast was exactly this point. Know what you don't know as a founder, and if you don't know that, hire for it and listen, and then more importantly, listen to the advice that the people that you hire because you pay them give you.